For those of you who don't know me, my name's Todd Medina. This is Soul Speaks 5D. This is the Soulology.1 network. And we have a special guest today that was introduced to me by a mutual friend who's actually on the Big Island here in Hawaii. I'm on a different island. And his name is Stewart. And he is a writer and a practitioner. And he's got some StewartBlackburn.com. I went to the site. We read through it here at the top of the show. But I think probably let me just say this. First of all, thank you for coming on and honoring us with your presence and sharing space with us today. Welcome to the show.
I'm delighted to be here, Todd. Thank you.
And I think, since we just met, we're going to get to know each other in front of everybody. There's no holds barred, right? So, I mean, I can tell at first glance that you have a pretty strong pedigree. You've been doing this for a while. You said You have a pastoral practice with a shamanistic approach, but you're not the typical shamanistic approach, and you're not the typical pastoral approach, which is very cool. Let me ask you this. When did you wake up to the fact that something else was going on in this world, or were you just born that way?
I can't tell if I was born this way, but I remember starting and being really fascinated by the mystical arts and the occult arts in my late teens and early 20s. But I let it go for a number of years, and then I got back into it in the neighborhood of 35 years ago. So I've been back studying very hard and working with various teachers for the last 35 years. Wow.
And so you become one in your own right, it sounds like.
Yeah. I mean, that's the nature of the way it works. We pass along what we have learned.
Yeah. And so you've been doing this for quite some time. What's it been like to observe this mass awakening occurring that some call ascension? What's it been like, through the eyes or the experiences of your clientele, and just in watching the world collectively expand their consciousness? What's that perspective that you have from the seat you've been in?
Well, from my perspective, it's really terrific. On the other hand, it's very much a relative kind of thing. That is to say, it's hard to tell how much faster things are going if I'm going very fast myself.
Yeah.
So I know there are a lot of people who are not particularly interested in these things.
Yeah.
And yet there are lots of people who are. What I find is the number of people that I encounter who are so much more advanced than I was at their age.
Yeah.
So in that sense, it's very exciting. And it's very gratifying to see all of these changes in the midst of what appears to be stagnation elsewhere.
Yeah. Now, do you, from your perspective, and having worked with so many people over the years, and then observing the collective, and in regard to also what you were saying about it being relative, are you seeing evidence that information is moving much quicker and people are picking up things quicker?
I wouldn't call it information, Todd. What I see is a kind of emotional and spiritual maturity.
Yeah.
That is a function of people knowing themselves better and being more comfortable with who they are.
Yeah.
So that's not a function of information per se. It really, the change that I find is people's willingness to access the deeper parts of themselves.
Now, when you talk about the deeper parts of themselves, are you talking about what some people refer to as the shadow, parts of themselves that they don't really want to look at? And are they wanting to look at them now, or more open to it now?
I guess that's part of it, Todd. I personally don't like the use of the metaphor of shadow, although it's got its utility. It gives a sense that there is something that we have to be working with, something that has some reality to it, whereas it really is just a matter of being afraid of being who we are.
Yeah.
So what I see is is a willingness to look at the things that they have been afraid of, and also to hold a larger vision of who they can be and where they can go. And to me, that's the most exciting part of it, is that we now have our horizons expanded tremendously and are aware of the many, many things we can do and the power that we can access.
Yeah. Yeah, that's fabulous. Now, you talk about pleasure on your website. It seems to be a big part of what you do. But before we get into that, I'd like to ask you to, if you would, just so we can understand further, what you mean specifically about what you say on your website in terms of the pastoral practice and in terms of the shamanic studying that you've done and applied, and why it's different than what would normal shamanism would be.
Well, I use pastoral as in what a minister does. So my counseling is, I am not a licensed counselor per se, but I am a licensed ordained minister in Huna International. So my legality, if you will, comes from that ordination. And as such, that gives me the right to do pastoral counseling. Basically, what I do is work with people, helping them recognize the many things that they do to themselves that make their lives much harder. My job, as I see it, is to help people become comfortable with who they are and to stop doing the many things that they do to hurt themselves.
Now, do you find that people are just unaware of the patterns that they have in their lives? Some people say that that's due to the conditioning, the labels, the roles that we play, and that type of thing. Or do you find typically that they just don't know what's happening?
Absolutely. But it also, I don't want to put any blame anywhere. This is a matter, but it is a matter of not understanding how things work. For instance, most people will criticize themselves for one thing or another, whether it be their weight or their appearance or age or whatever. And that kind of criticism is totally dysfunctional. It does not work. So I teach people to not criticize themselves at all so that they can be comfortable with who they are and go forth and claim their power.
Now, when somebody starts to find their power, what happens to them? Does this get us into the realm or the part of our life that we've chased, which is we might call instant manifestation, creative manifestation?
Well, the first symptom of getting comfortable with oneself is that they smile a lot more. But in order to get to that kind of power for instant manifestation, they need to access that part of themselves from which everything originates, all creation originates, which is the higher self. So either you or whatever you call it. So either you learn how to work with the higher self and understand the different techniques, or at least one really good technique of dealing with the higher self, or you simply identify as higher self, become the higher self, and operate from there.
Now, when you work with somebody, you said at least one process or way to get into communion with your higher self. How would you just take us through it, just right now? What would be a way to develop a relationship with our higher selves, or to be our higher selves?
Well, for instance, I work with a shamanic background, and so the shamanic journey does that. But and so you go to a shamanic journey, you get into some inner space, the upper world, the lower world, the middle world, and you deal with the beings that you see there, and you organize with them ways to get what it is that you're looking for. But to get to the higher self is very, very easy. You think about beauty. You basically, once you are in that space of contemplating beauty, you get there. You can get there, obviously, with drugs, with fasting, with dancing, tons of ways to get there. You can get there with chocolate. I often take people there with a piece of chocolate. So it really doesn't matter what you use. Yeah. It's really understanding where you're trying to go. And once you have spotted where you want to go, then it's easy to get there.
So, and when you talk about, and you bring in the frequency of pleasure, it seems to be, at least from at first blush, it seems to be an important part of your practice. That sounds like actually even what you're saying now about a contact in the higher self, you're using pleasure to do that. Yeah. And I hadn't thought about this. When I started my journey 7 years ago, I danced almost every night for 2 years. And that's where I connected. And I realized later, I hadn't thought about it, but that's where I made that connection in that 2 or 3 hours a night. I was connecting to the higher self. I was in a natural state. Yeah. A pleasurable state. So how does pleasure come into your practice?
Well, let's step back a moment. Every single decision that you make is based on the motivation to feel better than you currently do. Every single decision.
Yeah.
So obviously, you're after more pleasure, less pain. In everything.
Yeah.
So if you decide that you are going to go on a path of pleasure, and you find that you will go after the very best pleasures you can get. And each time you get to a pleasure and you enjoy it, but it's not quite as exciting as it used to be. There's an element of dissatisfaction that comes in. You use that blessing, really, of dissatisfaction to motivate you to seek out a higher pleasure. And it is these higher pleasures that you go to progressively that get you into the great spiritual pleasures.
Yeah.
So that's number one, how pleasure is a spiritual path. Secondly, did you ever read the Vijnanabhairava, the great tantric text, 112 Ways to Go to God?
No, I never did.
It's well worth reading. It's Osho's big, thick book, the Book of Secrets, is merely his discussion of those 112 ways to go to God. So the point of it is that there are many, many ways of doing it, but the secret to it all is to stay focused on what you are feeling and enjoy that feeling, and that will take you to where you want to go.
Now, you said a second ago, I want you to continue with that, but I want to make sure we catch this. You said a second ago, if you find something that's pleasurable, the next time you go back, it's not quite as pleasurable. Something maybe a little bit of a discontent with where you're at. Do you hold on to that feeling and use that as a blessing to move to a higher ground? Is that
a good question? No. What you use is your desire for a better feeling. Put it another way. You talked about manifestation. When you're trying to manifest something, you're doing so on the basis of your desire for something. Well, underneath every single desire is a desire for one or more specific feelings. You understand what the feeling is that you're after, then you can go directly to that feeling, whether you have the physical object or not. So the point is to look for the feelings that are the very best. I'm encouraging people to become connoisseurs of feelings so that they look for the very best feelings. And whatever is not really, really good is not aligned with your higher self. That's your spiritual guidance system. Does this make me feel really good or not?
Yeah.
And the better feeling it gives you, the more aligned you are.
Yeah, I think this is important because as we move into this year, there seems to be solid evidence that people are manifesting quicker. They're starting to gain control of it now, understanding that we have the power to control our thoughts and project the type of thoughts we want to, a lot like what you're talking about. And there's also that whole new part of the realm, I guess, that these things are actually being reciprocated by the universe very quickly. And it almost takes a little time to get comfortable with it. You know, you're poking yourself saying, is this really happening? You know, is this really happening? But my point is, we're on these paths. We're many people like myself, traveling around the world, following our higher self. It's not a traditional paradigm, like the 3D that we came out of, so to speak. And it just seems like there's always that carrot in front of us. How do we sustain the grace and appreciation for what we accomplished, and not fall into that pattern of discontent with what we have?
Well, it's it's a twofold thing. You can't really manifest anything new until you've fully accepted what you've got in the present.
Yeah.
And you want to do both things simultaneously. You want to appreciate what you've got and recognize that you're interested in something else.
Yeah.
So, and maybe something more or maybe something different. It doesn't matter. Yeah. So you want to savor what you have. In the first book I wrote, which was The Skills of Pleasure, savoring was skill number 5. And that's perhaps the most important, because until you understand or get the ability to spend time with your pleasure, to really take the time to thoroughly enjoy it, to have the mindfulness of pleasure, if you will, then you are jumping from one thing to another to get that pleasure that you're looking for. But the easiest way to have much more pleasure in your life is to simply enjoy what you've got. And by enjoy, I don't mean just sort of go and smell the roses. I mean spend time with the rose and actually sit there and allow the sensation of the fragrance of that rose to seep into your whole being. That's savoring. And so until people learn how to savor, they're just going to be flitting around like a bird looking for the perfect flower. So the real point is, if you want to get into the depths of the spiritual path, then you need to be willing to take the time to enjoy it. Yeah. If you're not enjoying it, why bother? It's really.
Yeah. And I think, and I can speak from my own experience, especially the last couple of years moving around a lot. You know, you'd get to one place and I'd make something happen, and then I was already thinking about something else, and I wasn't appreciating what I'd accomplished or where I was. And just very recently, my partner and I, we reunited here in Kauai early December, and we've moved around a little bit. And she said to me, you know, you really can't move into that next state. It's a lot like what you're saying, that next level, if you're not balanced and congruent with the place that you're at now, regardless of what that may be.
That's right.
Because as we know, there's blessings in everything, you know. But yeah, I think that's a very good point. I just wanted to reiterate that, because that's the same thing that I kind of just learned in the experiences I've had with her. Now, you talk about the shamanic influence that you've had as a student, and I just want to go back to this one more time. And you talk about, I believe in what you said on the website, you talk about your approach is not the shamanic warrior way, but it's still a shamanic way. Can you explain to us what you've done with that, where you've gone with that, and what your approach is?
The basic difference is that the warrior style of shamanism is one that encourages you to build up your power so that you can protect yourself. It basically has the assumption that the world is a dangerous place. And And so you want to be able to fend off all the things that are coming at you. That puts you in a mindset of fear, which is not useful. So I use a different approach from the warrior style, and sometimes people call it the adventurer style. I call it heart-centered shamanism. And that is to make the assumption that the world is a beautiful, loving place.
Yeah.
Yes, there are challenges, yes, there are things that we need to deal with, but we don't need to protect ourselves because by staying in a loving space, we keep the fear away, and it is the fear that is the problem, not other people coming at us. It is the fear that other people will come at us that is so destructive. So I stick with saying that the warrior shamanism can take you to much deeper places, and perhaps ultimately it comes to the same place, but it's a very different style. And here in Hawaii, where we, as you know, live aloha, aloha is very different from the warrior style. When you look around the world, Mongolian shamanism, for instance, is the warrior style. Most of the South American is not. A lot of the North American, Native American shamans, they are of the warrior style. I danced with San shamans in the Kalahari. That was not a warrior style. So it's two majorly different styles, and I much prefer the softer one.
Yeah, yeah. And it sounds like that style is more of the old saying, the best defense is a good offense, where you're playing to your strengths instead of really creating weaknesses.
Well, in a sense, you're right. Absolutely. But the focus really is knowing that if you are staying in a place of love, nothing's going to harm you.
Yeah, yeah. That's beautiful. Now, you have been doing your practice you've been doing for quite some time.
Mm-hmm.
Can you give us just an idea of the type of things that you do in your practice?
Well, for instance, I used to do lomi. You'll see that my email address is lomilomiman@gmail.com. And I liked doing lomi. I learned it there on Kauai. And it is a very wonderful shamanic kind of massage. And it's done with an intention to change what's going on in your life, to change your life dramatically. As one of my teachers said, as we were getting up on the table, if you're not ready to change your life, it's not too late to get off the table. But I found that I could be just as effective, and perhaps even more so, by helping people change the story that they're telling themselves.
Yeah.
And so, and basically what the massage does is get you to have a different story, and then the massage helps you relax into the new story. What I'm trying to do is to get people to become very conscious of what story they're telling themselves, so they can tell themselves an empowered story and stop telling themselves a story that makes them a victim or increases their weakness.
Yeah.
So that's an example of the kind of work I do. And most of the people that come to me will come and say, well, I've got this problem and that problem and that problem. And what I do is, one, help them recognize that they are creating the problem, number one. And two, that they are doing it unconsciously through things like criticism or expecting other people to be different, and they're not going to be. And there are a number of smaller ways, but just as pernicious, that people go about weakening themselves unnecessarily. Yeah,
basically reinforcing the things they've been doing that put them in the situation that they're in at that moment. Yeah,
right. The whole thing about power is to take responsibility for what's going on entirely in front of you.
How do you
are creating it?
Yes. how do you deal with the energy of, or a client, let's say, that's had the experience of being perpetrated, and understanding that we are the power, we are in control of it, and that type of thing. But I think that's somewhat of a challenge for many people out there where they've been perpetrated and they say, I absolutely had nothing to do with that. I didn't deserve that. And I would think that that's a block from, from the information I've gathered just talking to people, but I'd like to hear your perspective on it.
Okay. Well, for one thing, I encourage people to look at their lives from the perspective of soul or higher self. That is to say that they are much more than their physical body.
Yes.
And so for what reasons, for what powerful, important reasons did they choose to have this experience? I want to take victimhood out of it entirely. So generally what I do is I ask people to tell me their story. Fine. They tell me the story, this horrible story of how they've been abused by so-and-so and how awful it was. Then I ask them to take out the charged adjectives and adverbs. So instead of using things like I was forcibly raped and this caused an enormous trauma that I've never been able to get past, which is the story of a victim. And changing that and saying, okay, things happened to me that I didn't like. And I probably brought this about on a soul level, not on a physical level.
Right.
For me to learn things. So the next step then is to say, okay, what have I learned from this? What have I gained from this? Well, undoubtedly gained a fair bit of compassion and self-understanding. Not only compassion for oneself, but compassion for other people who have gone through similar sorts of things, and a better understanding of how events affect us. So there's one lesson. Another lesson might well be to understand how to take charge of a situation that they couldn't have done then, but they know how to do now, so that they can be more powerful in everything that happens from here on. So once they get to this place where they are recognizing that here are some incredible lessons, some very valuable gifts, then, believe it or not, they're in a position to be grateful for what happened.
Yeah.
And that's when they have taken their power back fully.
Yeah. That's the goal. It didn't feel so good when it happened, but when you look back, you can see that's where your most awakening moments and expansion have come from. Now, how long have you been in Hawaii, and how much has the Hawaiian culture, spiritual culture, because I think it's just part of it, how much of an influence has it been on your work and your life?
Well, I used to live in the state of Maine, and with my wife, I was married at the time, and we would come out to Hawaii once or twice a year, mostly to Kauai, to learn Lomi Lomi and Huna. And Huna is a spiritual philosophy that came through the Kahili family. There are different types of Huna. Huna simply means esoteric or hidden.
Oh, wow.
So it's a philosophy that simply says that this is the hidden knowledge of Hawaii or any given group of Hawaiians. So in any case, my tradition that I became part of came through the Kahili family, who lived on the north shore of Kauai.
Wow.
Traditionally in the Wainiha Valley.
Oh, yeah.
And so there's a lot of what I have both learned and teach that is related to that style of Hawaiian philosophy. But most of Hawaiian philosophy is not shamanic. And so what I do, rather than deal with accusations of cultural appropriation, I've taken a lot of things that I have learned, and my goodness, there's an awful lot to learn, and said, okay, I'm going to use this in the way that I'm also using some of the other great things like Tantra and Buddhism that have important things to say, as well as other places and sources of wisdom. So I think that we are in a time when we can't afford to rely on the old traditions, that things are necessarily new now that require a fresh look at what's going on both in the outer world and what's going on inside of us.
Yeah, that's a good point. And to hear it coming from someone like you, I think is a lot of validation, because there seems to be, or at least the way I see it, is we all came into this thing with the Akashic, or with what was already written or whatever was already laid out. But now we have our life experience, and we can combine those two in this extraordinary time where we have these extraordinary energies, and actually expand that and take that to more expansive level, because that's what this universe is. It's always expanding, and we are mirrors of that, or however you want to put it.
Sure.
Now, this Hanu, this sounds very, very interesting. You say it's not shamanic.
Well, Huna is shamanic.
Huna is. Okay.
Huna is shamanic, and very definitely shamanic. So we in this system, and I work within the system and without, so that I'm not just teaching Huna. I am taking Huna and expanding it, as you were just saying. We all need to expand, and basically saying, if it works, then it's Huna, or some people say, if it works, it's magic. Chaos magic very much is in that kind of way of thinking. So it's really making sure that we test for ourselves what works for us and what doesn't. Right. That's one of the reasons that I place such emphasis on pleasure, so that people will develop their own guidance system, rather than trying to follow dogma and the words of some authority.
Yes, very good, very good. That's a great way to approach it, because to gravitate to what you like, and to be the one who's in charge of what you like. I like that. Now, you talked too about in your early adulthood, you were attracted to the occult. You just brought up the word magic, which I'm a big proponent of.
Okay.
And I just I just want to get your take on, what is magic? How do we create magic? How do we create good? How do we create that expansive energy that we hold in our core?
Well, unlike traditional magic, I'm not a big believer in rituals, although rituals can be very useful. What I'm interested in mostly is the mechanism for how all of this stuff works. How do we create, period?
Yeah.
So if we understand how we create, then we can call it magic, we can call it shamanism, we can call it anything we like. So the trick here then is to find the source of our creations. That is to say, to go in as deep as we can and see where it all starts, to see what it is that we do that makes changes, and then to take responsibility for making those changes in ways that work for us. And generally speaking, the ways that work for us do no harm and are of help to other people as well as ourselves.
Yeah. So magic is like a way of life. It's like a lifestyle.
Basically, it's a lifestyle, and we can call it anything we like. But yeah, magic is to understand our ability to manipulate energy.
Yeah.
And once we get into that, then we become much more powerful beings. And what I believe is the the destiny of mankind at this point is to really move into that place where we are all understanding how we are conscious creators.
Yeah. I love what you say, because you're basically saying the magic isn't in the hocus pocus. It's in raising your frequency, your vibration, and sustaining that and expanding that as a lifestyle.
Mm-hmm.
You know, yeah.
Right.
And then you attract, both consciously and not. I think at least that's where I'm at. Sometimes we consciously work towards something. We're raising our frequency, raising our intentions, getting deeper into the core of our heart, and then something pops up out of nowhere that's actually better than what you were thinking about.
That's absolutely true. And I want to add something to that, Todd. As we raise our vibration, besides things popping up that are even better than we'd ever thought, very often things that sort of shoot us down and blow us apart pop up. Yeah. And all of a sudden we have these crises that we don't expect and can't figure out why we're in a crisis now when our vibration was so high.
Right.
And so I think it's important to remember that as we raise our vibration, all the things within us that are not of that vibration will show themselves.
Yeah.
There is a cognitive dissonance here between the old beliefs that we've got and this new energy that we're now playing around with. And so we need to expect things to come up that will challenge us.
Yeah.
Because we are now getting ready and we're now prepared to deal with that.
Yeah, I just talked about that on an earlier show. I had an experience with my partner a couple of days ago, and it was phenomenal. It was phenomenal. It was a dimensional experience, and I was the recipient of it. I received all this golden creative particles in my body.
Uh-huh.
I wake up the next morning and I got hit with a giant fear bomb on my head.
Uh-huh. Okay, so that's exactly what I'm talking about here.
Yeah, and it took me all day, but I was able to see the value of it and move a little bit higher. But go ahead.
Good. Yeah.
Oh, I thought you were going to expand on that. I'm sorry.
I'm just saying that it is one of those things that keeps happening, and nobody, to my knowledge, ever talks about the fact that something, this hard stuff, this difficult stuff, will come up once, as we have cleared the way for it, if you will.
Yeah.
And we have developed our power and skill, so we're now finally ready to deal with it.
Yeah. That's interesting because many times you feel like you're clearing stuff to make room for the golden particles, but you're right, it can work the other way. It's like
I use an analogy of digging a hole. You go out in the afternoon and you dig yourself a fine hole for whatever purpose, and you go to bed that night very proud of the fact that you dug this really great hole. But it rains that night, and you come out the next day, and your hole is not as deep because the sides have fallen in, and it really is not very impressive at all now. And so you think that you've taken one step forward and one step back. But in fact, what you've done is your new hole, once you dig out the stuff that's fallen in, is a much more stable hole.
Yeah.
So you haven't gone backwards at all. There was just more to do to have that hole that you were after.
Yeah.
You with me?
Yeah. Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah. That's what I was getting at. It's like, it's like that hand of providence that what it has in store for you is something far greater than you could imagine for yourself. And it's going to happen however the universe deems appropriate. And I couldn't have even thought of it. So that hole comes back the next day, and it's actually a better hole for what you've got coming. And I think too, from your perspective, do you see hard evidence? Do you see more evidence of universal reciprocation for people, or maybe that's just the consequence of people being more open and expanding themselves in this great awakening?
I don't understand your question, Todd.
Well, what
Sorry.
I mean is, do you see in your clientele, and even in what you observe in the collective, are you seeing evidence that there is universal reciprocation in a positive way, meeting us for the work that we're doing, the inner work that we're doing, and the expansions that we're going through?
Um, I, well, it's a very definite yes and no. What I see is people creating and seeing the results of their creations. So we can say that there is a universal thing out there that is responding to us. However, I find that a disempowered perspective. Because you're making the assumption that there is an objective reality out there. And one that is changing and all of that.
Yeah.
From my perspective, there really isn't an objective reality. That what we call objective, the collective consciousness, the collective, what is that wonderful term? Well, in any case, the reality that we all agree on, is a special form of subjective reality. So what we're finding is, yes, things are apparently different, but that doesn't mean that they are different out there.
Right.
They're different inside of us, and it is that inner world that creates the outer world, and that's what's changing, is the inner world.
Yeah, I can see what you're saying, because it's still an externalization. We talk about trying to find our savior, our problems, all external and all that stuff. But I can see what you're saying. That makes a lot of sense. It's thought provoking. It really is. Now, do you have any events or functions through your practice there on the Big Island that you have coming up, or anything like that?
Well, I've got a shamanic training in March, at the beginning of March. And it's a 5-day workshop that I'm going to do here at my residence. And that's a way of getting into thinking like a shaman. It's called the soul of the shaman. And so it involves a lot of shamanic practices, but mostly it's about how do we look at the world from the eyes of a shaman, which is a very different perspective. But to be frank, I've sort of shied away from the workshops to a large extent, because there's so much information that changes a person, that unless that person takes the time to digest these changes, a lot of it just plain gets lost. So I much prefer to do one-on-one sessions or small groups on a regular basis, where there's time to think about and to feel, more importantly, what has been discussed and what the experiences are that we go through. So I have a mentorship program, and I do private counseling, which I think is much more effective. So that people can go through their changes, have time to think of what their questions are, and then to take the time to answer their specific questions, rather than to pass along a lot of information. This is about ever increasing experiences for the true education. Yeah,
I love it. Not too much dogma at all in that curriculum. Now, if you had to offer some advice or perspective specifically to people in this age right now, when it comes to manifesting their reality, what would your advice be?
Relax.
That's a good one. That reminds me of the Zen Buddhist monastery. I read a story one time, and they were having, I think, a graduation, and the master walked up to the podium to give the speech, and a bird chirped chirped like 3 times, and he said, "That's it," and he walked off.
Yeah.
But that's a powerful word. One of the things I've realized in my journey, from time to time, as I try to sustain the magic, is that's a big word. It's the flow is relaxed.
To me, it is the essence of the spiritual path.
Yeah.
Every single aspect of the spiritual path, and whatever sort, is about relaxing into who you are and relaxing into the intensity of life.
Yeah.
That relaxing into the intensity is critical. And a lot of people will shy away from intensity, equating it with pain.
Yeah.
But pain is the combination of intensity and fear. You let go of the fear, you've got intensity, but you can relax into intensity. And by doing that, you open yourself up to feeling things like love, joy, happiness, harmony, ecstasy, enlightenment.
Laughter.
Absolutely. So it is the ability to relax, and particularly relax into intensity, that makes all the difference.
Wow, that's great. I'd love to do a further collaboration with you. I mean, we're basically neighbors, at least as long as I'm here. But
where are you?
Right now, I'm on the south shore,
over
near Popoi. I think that's what they call it.
Poipu.
Poipu. I'm really bad with the names, but I spent a few weeks up on the North Shore near Anini Beach.
Oh yeah, nice place.
And we spent a little bit of time in Kapa'a, which I enjoy that too. The weather's very nice on the south side, though. I will say that.
Right.
It's very nice. Kind of the north shore is very well. It's pretty wet, so
particularly this time of year.
Yeah, pretty wet. So we now Hawaii, the Big Island, Honolulu's on Oahu, right? Is that right? Yeah. Okay. So I do have some friends on the Big Island. I mean, you never know. I think we're gonna run up to Honolulu and do some business, some governmental stuff soon. I don't know if we'll get up to the Big Island, but would love to do some further collaborations, be it in person or online.
Fine.
And I would just ask that you put your links in the comments, because I've seen several comments here directed to you. And this is what this is all about. It's a platform for people like you. So please put your links up. And let me just say, on behalf of everybody, thank you for your service to humanity. And thank you for honoring us with your presence today and sharing space with us. I look forward to doing it again.
It's been a great pleasure, Todd. Thank you.